This is the Literacy Mindset Podcast, where education leaders discuss identifying and removing phonological barriers with Mindplay's CEO, Jeff Pendleton.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I am very excited for my guest today, Dr. Robin E. Henderson, who is the Chief Program Officer at SchoolSmart KC. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. I'm excited for the conversation today.
I am too. We have a lot of fun things to talk about. You guys have exciting work that you're participating in and kind of leading in the effort. So we'll dive in and talk a little bit about that. Plus, you have a PhD in reading, and so always fun to talk about the dynamics of reading and, you know, this very, very brand new thing called the science of reading that we've never heard of before until just recently. So we'll get into all of that fun stuff. But first, why don't you give us maybe a little bit of a background on how in your career you navigated yourself all the way to Kansas City?
Yeah, glad to do that. So I started my teaching career. My running joke, Jeff, I tell people don't question my math because my PhD is in reading, but I started my teaching career over 30 years ago when I was about 3 in Indianapolis. Right. It's my story. It's my math. And I'm sticking to it. But I was an elementary school teacher and then found my way into school administration. I had the privilege of teaching in a teacher prep program in a small liberal arts university in Indianapolis area. And then I eventually made my way to Memphis, where I was one of the founding directors of the Memphis Teacher Residency. And about 9 years ago, got swooped up and moved here to Kansas City and helped start a charter school, and am now privileged to work as the Chief Program Officer here at SchoolSmart. We are a funding mechanism here to bring collaboration and cohesion in what we refer to as the Kansas City Public Education System, which includes our Kansas City Public School District, as well as the charter schools that sit within its footprint. So that's the journey I took to get here, and have been at SchoolSmart a little over a year and deep in the work of literacy, which I love.
Awesome. Well, we're going to talk a lot about that. But so Kansas City metro area, focused mostly on Kansas City public schools and surrounding charter schools for that funding mechanism, nonprofit. The focus is on, in essence, raising money and providing opportunities for that. Maybe talk a little bit more about what it is that.
Yeah, so we, SchoolSmart's about 8 years old, and we were started by some core funders, really with an idea of bringing some unity and collaboration around funding specific to education in our ecosystem, which is what we refer to it as. And so we have the opportunity to fund things that support talent in our metro area. And when we talk talent, we talk principals, school teachers, all of those supports to help our schools really be intentional around how they're thinking about staffing and having supports for that. We have a big focus around early childhood and early education. So we support a collaborative of early learning sites as well as schools that they partner with. And then we have some initiatives related to mental health and real world learning. And most recently have kind of added to our portfolio this very exciting initiative called Literacy for All Students in our area.
Okay. Literacy for all sounds like a great topic to talk about on the Literacy Mindset Podcast. So this is right up our wheelhouse. You have a PhD in reading. You know how difficult it can be to acquire reading skills and to teach them. Why is it hard to learn how to read?
Yeah, you think about just humans being born into the world, and there are some things that we innately, eventually, as a tiny human, you get curious about these things at the end of your arms, and you're like, oh, I can use these to do things, including like throw cereal on the floor, right? Eventually begin to experiment with that, or the movement of your body. And you start realizing, oh, if I scooch a little bit and then eventually I can stand up. But reading is not one of those intuitive tasks like that, right? And I used to always tell people, students actually children try to write before they try to read. Every parent has the crayon marks on their wall to prove it, right? They figure out that hand that they figured out, if you put something in it, you can draw on the wall. But reading needs more support, and that acquisition of changing oral language into being able to read the language is a little more complex and needs support to make that happen.
And when you say support, we think of that support as direct instruction. It's like it needs to be explicitly taught because, but like you said, in our general feedback mechanisms of the human condition, we don't get a lot of feedback on reading, and therefore we need to have it taught to us. Is that?
Yeah. And so, you think about our English language, right? We have these 26 arbitrary symbols that someone decided these are the symbols we're going to use. And then they have sounds attached to them. Well, it gets more complex in English, right? Because there's not a 1-to-1 ratio. Right. One symbol can have multiple sounds. And then once you start combining them with other symbols, then the sound options vary. And so we need someone to help us crack the code. We need someone to step in and to help us make sense of, these things I've been saying, words, they actually have visual mechanisms that go, these letters make sounds. And when I string them together, that's where I get the words, and I can write them, I can read them. But that doesn't happen without, as you said, explicit support mechanisms.
Yeah, no, that's an important way of thinking about it. When we were talking before we started recording, you sort of mentioned something that was interesting to me in the way that you think about foundational skills. So obviously there are discrete skills that are taught that we think of as foundational skills. And you mentioned phonics or phonological awareness, and there's a national reading panel that will talk to you about those skills at some level. That's the joke about new and it's old and old is new. But you described sort of the essence of foundational skills isn't necessarily just the acquisition of those discrete skills, but of the strategies of acquiring those skills that then let you, as you continue to develop as a reader, become more fluent and become more capable and comprehensive in your understanding of the language. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So there are means to an end, right? I mean, you learn the sounds and the symbols and the attachment of them for the purpose of ultimately being able to make meaning of a text, right? The end goal is not that a kid masters phonics. That phonics is a support to getting us all to that end goal, that anything I pick up to read, the poster that's on your wall behind you, I can read that because that phonics piece, I don't even think about it, right? It becomes those, it's the beauty of being a reading nerd, right? The science behind what your brain does. That stuff becomes automatic, and you don't even think about those skills. You have them and you use them as needed as you come across unfamiliar words that may be a barrier to your comprehension. But the ultimate goal of reading is to make meaning and understanding and learn new things and craft new ideas based on new learnings.
Yeah. I love that. And it's a great way of thinking about how we establish why we need the discrete skills and why we need it to become more or less muscle memory so that we can read with comprehension and really acquire meaning and context and understanding through written text. So that's fantastic. You get the luxury and challenge of understanding a metro area that has various levels of proficiency. We've talked about it. NAEP scores across the country in reading don't seem to be going up, right? And in some cases are just coming down a little bit, depending on, which snapshot of time you look at it. And so how do you work and think about the difference between sort of establishing the preventative foundational skills? Let's get you reading. You talked about pre-K centers, you talked about early childhood, but then also what is our current proficiency in third grade, and how do we catch people up? How do we intervene for those students that aren't there? So how does your organization kind of think through the difference and nuance there?
Yeah, so I mentioned our Literacy for All Students, an effort that we have
Right.
underway, and we are doing the both and, which I think is absolutely a necessity in our area, probably in many communities it would be. But I think we've lived in a cycle of intervention for so long that we've stopped thinking about how we can be preventative. And so the supports that our organization has the privilege of being able to offer and come alongside schools are the both and. So we are providing grant funding to ensure that the schools in our area have full-time literacy coaches whose dedicated work is about that job embedded professional development specific to those early literacy skills. How do you take the state required science of reading training, which for us is letters? How do you align that into your curriculum? How do you help it meet the needs of your students? How do you offer really strong core instruction for your students? That's a lot, right? For a teacher going on in a classroom with 20 to 25 students. So let's give them a partner to come alongside them whose full job is to be that partner in the space. So let's shore up that first teach that every child has access to so
Right.
that when they leave first and second grade, they are right on pace to be proficient and have that all of those phonological and phonics and phonemic awareness skills under their belt and are ready to start reading and thinking about comprehension and vocabulary. But let's put a partner in that space.
Okay.
And then also giving schools funding to support tutoring, and both in the intervention side of things, but also prevention. And so thinking about funding to support all students K to 3 having access to tutoring that meets their needs. And what are mechanisms? That's how we got introduced to Mindplay as one of the mechanisms that our schools have chosen to address that need and to meet every student where he or she is on that reading journey. And so now it becomes an enhancement to what is happening in classrooms, not just from an intervention, but also from an opportunity for acceleration or for continued growth for students. So it really, I think we have to get to the both and space.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's interesting because you are committed to instructional coaches, right? That can work side, do some job embedded coaching. The human side of it is so important. But yet you also have partnered with us with some campuses to provide the technology because of technology's ability to reach, right, so many students at an affordable rate. So kind of talk about how you guys think, just how do you think about that as you think about fundraising, as you think about funding mechanisms? What's the balance between it? Obviously, we're a software provider, so we think a lot about how to do that. But you get to see both sides of it. So how do you guys think about it?
Yeah, so I think, again, you mentioned the affordability, which gives access to more students, but our schools also have the autonomy to think about there's some students that need that personal one-on-one touch. And so our schools are doing the both and. So they have opportunities for students that need it, and based on their data, based on where they are, based on who they are as people, to have a one-on-one in-person tutor to work with them 3 days a week for 20 minutes a pop to go deep on whatever their literacy needs are. But they can also at the same time be offering to the other students this virtual option. So it really does allow for a stretch of resources that schools couldn't afford if they were just wanting to do in-person individual tutoring, because the tutors that do it are not volunteers. They're paid, they're trained, they're skilled. And so that comes with a cost, but something affordable where we have a high quality virtual partner offering allows for a more expansive touch. And I think that's the beauty of, being able to make the decision based on a need versus a financial prohibitor.
Yeah, I love that. And organizations like yours that come in and try and bridge that gap are so essential to being able to provide access for that. When you think about the challenges in the intervention space, you and I talked earlier a little bit about individualized education plans, how great it is, and not to take away anything at all from the value of it in a special education environment, but we operate oftentimes in the intervention space, which is a bit more individualized. It is a bit more personalized from that. And yet core curriculum is so essential to make sure that the right instruction is happening in the beginning. How do we find a bridge of those two worlds? Because we don't want to be in an intervention cycle. We'd like to be more in the initial instruction and prevention cycle, but I don't really want to lose the personalization that can come through what's in intervention today. So do you guys think about that very much?
We are starting to think about how do we open up opportunities and provide spaces for teachers to think about how can using the virtual space give them more time to provide the personalized, right? Are there things that we know there are, right? There are things that a child can only get through human interaction. And let's take the person who's skilled to do that and give that child that time. But let's think about how can we utilize all the great technology that's being birthed to free up that educator's time, right? So I think that gets to be our shift. And I hope when, not if, but when we see the success of this 4-year commitment that funders are making to our schools, that we will be able to think about, wow, look at what was able to be done. And I think having tools that are not just used for intervention do that, because I think every child deserves an individualized plan. What do we do to meet the needs of, I have a friend whose child is now 30 and he has a PhD in several different engineering threads. I don't know, electrical and I don't know. He's going to open an energy company one day, right? That's what the PhD is in. But when their child showed up to kindergarten, he was reading already. Like on first day, he went to kindergarten reading. Right. So then as your point around core instruction wouldn't meet typical core instruction in a kindergarten classroom, even done well, wouldn't meet his individual needs. But are there opportunities to do that because we've got technology in place? So I think it's an opportunity to think about how do we free up the teacher's time by using some technological resources.
I love that. I think allowing human connection to happen when human connection is the most important thing is the best thing that technology can do, right? Is like make sure that you create these spaces for that. I want to dive in just a little bit on the 4-year timetable that you talked about. That's another thing that can happen in schools too many times is it's a flash in the pan. I've tried it, or I got 1 year grant money. What can I do in a year? What is it about the 4-year cycle for you? Just talk about how do you bring about meaningful change and how do you stick to things?
Yeah. Well, that's exactly a part of our theory of change. This doesn't happen overnight. We have, on last count, official number, about 250,000 not fully literate adults in our metropolitan area. And if we don't figure this out, we'll just keep adding to that number. And we know that has health implications. It has workforce implications. It has public safety implications when people are not literate. And so we really said to funders and continue to say to potential funders, we need to give schools time to see change. We need to, as one of the leaders in one of the districts that we partner with said, she loved this idea and the work that we were bringing because it's about building capacity in people, not about bringing new programming. And that this is going to take time to really build capacity, and our teachers build capacity. Parts of the programming that we're also bringing are partners from the community. We have some amazing literacy facing and focused organizations, so we're bringing them into the conversations to provide trainings for parents, right? How do we did a survey of parents in our metropolitan area and asked, what do you need? And as it relates to reading with your child.
Right.
And, in addition to having resources at home, they wanted to better understand what does it mean to read on grade level and what could they do about it at home. right? And again, schools have so much on their plates. There's so much we ask of schools these days that we said there are partners out there that provide trainings for parents. Let's bring them to the conversation as a resource for schools and parents so we really are raising the flag here, Jeff, saying this is a community effort. And we're grateful to our founding funders. We launched this work in the 24-25 school year in 9 schools with a 4-year commitment to fund the tutoring, to fund the coach, to fund ongoing professional development for the coach, as well as the school's principal, bringing along our parent organizations and our literacy organizations, having a strong research partner because we're collecting data like crazy because we want to know what's working, how it's working, what do we gain from this. So we've got all those folks at the table thanks to support from what we are calling kind of our initial funders for these first 9 schools, which is the Kansas City Royals Foundation. Yes, as in baseball, right? The baseball team is behind reading, and the Sherman Family Foundation. And so thanks to their generous support and deep commitment to literacy, the Royals are running a Joy and Inspiration campaign. So they're partnering with these same 9 schools to today. For the baseball fans that listen to your podcast, Bobby Witt Jr. was in classrooms today, bringing joy to students and talking about reading with them and what books he's reading. And the Royals Foundation partnered with Mo Willems to bring Pigeon. So we had Pigeon at the ballpark with students. So really helping students, because that was one of the things parents said. They want their kids to love reading as well and not just see it as a chore. And so we have this deep investment from community partners. And thanks to those early funders, other funders have come on. So we're adding 3 additional schools. And we won't stop until we have the same level of supports for 4 years in all 40 of the elementary schools that sit in our footprint. And then for us, a lot of these best practices are in policy. So we have some strong policy related to reading, but they're not yet funded. And we said as a community, we don't need to wait on the funding, but we can still begin to ask those who can to go and advocate. And over the next, we tell people we've given you a 4-year runway. Go get some funding baked in behind these things.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's inspiring to hear, the types of organizations that want to invest in this and their commitment. Sometimes in the business world, I tell the funders of companies like ours that your capital needs to be patient. The money needs to be patient because it takes time to do some of these things, and with time and with investment, we can make really good things happen. This has been awesome. It's been a fun conversation to talk about. Maybe as a last question, how do you think that others can maybe replicate what it is that you're doing? You got the Kansas City public schools and metro area, and it's an amazing place, especially if you happen to be sports fans. It's a great place on that, but there's clearly great things going on. But do you have any ideas or suggestions for those that might be looking to do something similar in other parts of the country?
Yeah, I think it really is raising the awareness. I think that's one of the things that continues. I've been in education, so I'm aware of the literacy crisis. I'm aware, but how many people are? Right. And I think that's a big part of what we are getting to do is we're getting to raise awareness of the complexity. I had a chance to speak to a group of business leaders yesterday, and I just pointed out to them and I said, do you think about the materials that your organization produces or uses internally? And have you ever considered that can your employees actually access the content? And now think about if they can't, what does that mean for your industry? And so I think that's the starting point is how do we raise awareness that this is a community issue? And then I think look to your state policy, what's already in place that are those best practices that may be unfunded that your community can rally behind. Talk to your schools. We didn't bake this up in a closet. We spent a lot of time talking to teachers and principals and school district leadership, families, community members to say, what's the need and how can we fill the need? And so it really, I would say, approaching it from a collaborative mindset and then raising that awareness and inviting others to do what they can. One of our newest funders that's coming on board said, we don't have a baseball team. Like, how do we do the joy and inspiration? And I said, it's okay. We can help you think that through, but we also can go find a partner. So I've got somebody that's saying, what if we got a university in our backyards, their sporting team to be the joy and inspiration partner? Or, there's so many possibilities. And so I think raising the awareness and inviting others to bring what they can to the table so that we can solve this problem, because it's not just a Kansas City problem.
Right. No, excellent words. Advice, I think something that's really tangible. We need to raise awareness, and we need to go find the partners that we can leverage. Thank you, Dr. Henderson, for spending time with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure for me, and I hope that we get to do it again soon.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love to hear from you. Learn how we help students by identifying and removing phonological barriers at mindplay.com.